The chains around Adelaide Kane's wrists had worn grooves into her skin over the past 18 years, though she barely remembered a time before them. She had been born in the darkness of her father's root cellar in Kingston, Montana Territory, in 1859, and aside from the first few moments of her life, she had never seen daylight. Her mother had died bringing her into the world, and her father, consumed by grief and madness, had blamed the infant for his loss. He locked her away, feeding her scraps through a slot in the door, telling her the world above was filled with demons and fire, that her pale skin would burn to ash if she ever ventured up the wooden stairs. By 1877, Adelaide had grown into a woman in that perpetual twilight. She knew the feel of cold earth beneath her bare feet, the smell of dampness and decay, the sound of her own breathing echoing off stone walls. She had taught herself to read by the light of a single candle, devouring the water-damaged books her father had stored down there before his descent into insanity. She knew about the sun from those pages, about blue skies and green grass and the warmth of daylight, but she had never experienced any of it. Her world was 10 feet by 12 feet, with a ceiling so low she could touch it with her fingertips. The day everything changed started like any other. Her father descended the stairs with her morning meal, a bowl of thin porridge and a crust of bread. He was muttering to himself as he always did, warnings about the evil that waited above, reminders that he was protecting her from a cruel fate. But this time, his foot caught on the third step from the bottom, the one that had been weakening for months. The wood gave way with a sharp crack, and he tumbled forward, his head striking the stone wall with a sickening thud. Adelaide pressed herself against the far wall, her heart pounding. She had learned long ago not to approach her father, not to speak unless spoken to. But he did not move. Minutes passed, then an hour. The porridge grew cold. His chest no longer rose and fell. She realized with a mixture of terror and something else, something she dared not name, that he was dead. For 2 days she waited. Surely someone would come. Surely someone knew she existed, would notice her father's absence and investigate. But no one came. The hunger that had been her constant companion intensified. The water bucket ran dry. On the 3rd day, she understood that if she did not act, she would die in this cellar that had been her prison for nearly 2 decades. The keys hung from her father's belt. She had to step over his body to reach them, her hands shaking so violently she could barely grasp the metal. The locks on her wrist shackles were rusted, and it took several attempts to find the right key. When the iron finally fell away, she gasped at the strange lightness of her arms. The shackles on her ankles came off next, and for the first time in her memory, she could move freely. The stairs terrified her more than anything. Each step creaked beneath her weight, threatening to give way as they had for her father. She climbed slowly, one hand against the wall for balance, her bare feet careful on the worn wood. At the top was a door. It was not locked from the inside. Her father had relied on her fear and the chains to keep her captive, never imagining she might have reason to test the barrier. Adelaide pushed the door open and immediately cried out, throwing her arms over her face. Light, blinding and painful, flooded through the narrow windows of the small cabin. It was only the weak illumination of a cloudy afternoon, filtered through dirty glass, but to her light-starved eyes it felt like staring into a furnace. She dropped to her knees, gasping, tears streaming down her cheeks. It took nearly an hour before she could lower her arms and squint into the room. The cabin was small and filthy, evidence of her father's deteriorating mental state everywhere. Trash piled in corners, dirty dishes stacked on a table, the smell of unwashed clothing and neglect. But there were windows. She could see through them, see shadows of trees and the shapes of buildings beyond. She spent the rest of that day learning to tolerate the muted light, drinking water from a pump in the kitchen until her stomach ached, eating stale bread and a jar of preserves she found in a cupboard. She wrapped herself in a blanket from her father's bed and curled up in a corner, overwhelmed by the space around her, by the absence of stone walls pressing close. The next morning, she knew she had to make a choice. She could not stay here. Even if she could overcome her fear of the world outside, there was no food left, and she had no money. She would need help, but the thought of stepping through the front door, of exposing herself to that burning light her father had always warned about, filled her with a primal terror that made her whole body shake. She was still trying to gather her courage when she heard footsteps on the porch. Heavy boots, the jingle of spurs, a knock at the door, firm and authoritative. "Jacob Kane, this is Marshall Theodore Winters. You are 3 months past due on your property taxes. I need to speak with you." Adelaide froze, her breath caught in her throat. She knew she should answer, should call out, but fear paralyzed her. The marshal knocked again, louder this time. Then she heard the door handle turn. She had forgotten to lock it. The door swung open and a man stepped inside. He was middle-aged with a thick mustache and a star pinned to his vest. His eyes swept the filthy room and landed on her, a pale ghost wrapped in a blanket in the corner, and his hand moved instinctively to the gun at his hip before he realized she was no threat. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice sharp with surprise. "Where is Jacob Kane?" Adelaide tried to speak, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. "Dead, in the cellar." The marshal's expression shifted from suspicion to concern. "Are you his daughter? I heard his wife died, but I did not know there was a child." "I am 18, Adelaide managed, her voice stronger now. "He kept me locked below, since I was born." She watched the disbelief cross the marshal's face, followed by horror as he took in her pale skin, almost translucent in the dim light, the marks on her wrists and ankles, the way she cowered from the windows. He holstered his gun and approached slowly, the way one might approach a wounded animal. "Show me," he said quietly. Adelaide led him to the cellar door, stood at the top of the stairs as he descended. She heard his sharp intake of breath, his muttered curse when he saw the chains, the filth, the body of her father at the bottom. He climbed back up quickly, his face pale. "Miss Kane, I need you to come with me. I will send someone for your father's body and to deal with this property." "But you cannot stay here." "I cannot go outside," Adelaide said, her voice breaking. "The light, it will burn me. He said it would burn me." The marshal's expression softened. "Your father lied to you about many things, I suspect." "The sun will not harm you, child, but I understand you are frightened. Here." He pulled off his long coat and held it out to her. "Wrap this around yourself, pull the hood up over your face. I will take you somewhere safe." She had no choice but to trust him. Adelaide pulled on the coat, drowning in its size, and drew the hood forward until it shadowed her face. The marshal took her arm gently and guided her toward the door. When he opened it, even with the protection of the hood, the brightness made her gasp and stumble. Her eyes burned, tears flowing freely. She would have fled back inside if the marshal had not held her firmly. "Easy now," he said. "Keep your eyes on the ground, just a short walk to my office." The journey down Kingston's Main Street was a nightmare. Adelaide kept her gaze fixed on the packed dirt beneath her bare feet, but even that reflected light that stabbed into her skull. She heard voices around her, people calling out to the marshal, asking questions. She felt their stares like physical touches. Her legs, weak from 18 years of limited movement, trembled with every step. The marshal's office was dim and cool, and Adelaide nearly sobbed with relief when he closed the door behind them. He guided her to a chair and pressed a cup of water into her hands. "I need to contact some people, figure out what to do for you," he said. "Just rest here. No one will hurt you." Adelaide sat in the chair, the coat still pulled tight around her, and tried to process everything that had happened. She was outside. She had walked beneath the sky, even if she had not been able to look at it. She was free of the cellar. But she had no idea what came next, no understanding of how to exist in this vast world that had been denied to her for so long. Over the next few hours, the marshal's office filled with people. A doctor who examined her gently, asking questions she could barely answer. A woman from the church who brought clothes that actually fit and helped her wash and dress in a back room. The minister himself, a kindly older man who spoke in soothing tones about God's mercy and the goodness of his people. They all stared at her pale skin, her light, sensitive eyes, the way she flinched from every sound and movement. The problem, as it became clear through their discussions, was what to do with her. Kingston was a small town in the Montana Territory, still rough around the edges in 1877. There was no hospital, no institution for someone in her condition. The church woman suggested the orphanage, but the minister pointed out she was 18, too old for such a place. The doctor worried about her health, her inability to function in normal society. "She needs time to adjust," he said. "Somewhere quiet, away from the bustle of town. Somewhere she can learn to tolerate daylight gradually." "What about up the mountain?" the marshal suggested. "There is a man who lives up there, traps and hunts. Name is Marcus Ashford. He comes into town every few weeks to trade his furs and buy supplies. Decent fellow, keeps to himself mostly. His cabin is isolated, peaceful, might be exactly what she needs." The doctor frowned. "Is it appropriate? A young woman living alone with a bachelor?" "I am not suggesting anything improper," the marshal said firmly. "But she needs help, and she needs it in an environment that would not overwhelm her. Ashford is a good man. Lost his family to fever back in Missouri, came out here to start over. He has been nothing but honest and hardworking in all his dealings. I could ride up there, speak to him, explain the situation." Adelaide listened to them discuss her fate as if she were not there. She wanted to speak up, to have some say in what happened to her, but she had no basis for making decisions. She knew nothing of the world of these people, of what was safe or dangerous. She could only trust that they meant well. The marshal left within the hour to ride up the mountain. Adelaide remained in his office, too afraid to move, too overwhelmed to do more than sit and shake. The church woman, whose name was Martha, stayed with her, speaking softly about trivial things, trying to ease her terror. When darkness fell and Adelaide could finally open her eyes without pain, she looked out the window for the first time at the world beyond her prison. Kingston was a modest town, a main street lined with wooden buildings, dirt roads, people moving about with purpose and confidence. In the distance, she could see the dark shapes of mountains rising against the night sky, and above, scattered across the vast blackness, more stars than she had ever imagined existed. She pressed her face close to the glass, drinking in the sight, and for the first time since climbing out of the cellar, she felt something other than fear. She felt wonder. The marshal returned the next morning, and with him came the mountain man. Adelaide heard him before she saw him, the heavy tread of boots on the wooden porch, a voice deep and rough asking questions. When the door opened, she instinctively pressed herself back into the corner where she had spent the night, making herself small. Marcus Ashford had to duck slightly to clear the doorframe. He was a massive man, well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders that seemed to fill the doorway. His hair was dark brown and hung past his collar, tied back with a leather cord. His face was weathered and tanned from years outdoors, with a strong jaw shadowed by several days of beard growth. His arms, visible where his sleeves were rolled up, were corded with muscle built from hard work and harder living. He wore buckskin trousers and a simple homespun shirt, a knife at his belt, and moccasin boots that had seen considerable wear. But it was his eyes that caught Adelaide's attention. They were a striking blue-gray, and when they found her in the corner, they held no judgment, no pity, only a calm assessment. He studied her for a long moment, then looked at the marshal. "This is the girl you told me about, Miss Adelaide Kane. This is Marcus Ashford." I explained your situation to him. He has agreed to let you stay at his cabin for a time, help you adjust, teach you what you need to know to survive out here. Marcus moved further into the room, and Adelaide saw him make a conscious effort to move slowly, to keep his voice low and unthreatening. He crouched down a few feet away from her, bringing himself closer to her eye level. "Miss Adelaide, I will not hurt you. I understand you have been through something terrible, something I cannot rightly imagine. The marshal tells me you need a quiet place to heal, to learn about the world at your own pace. My cabin is a half-day's ride up the mountain. It is just me there, peaceful and isolated. I am offering you a place to stay, no strings attached, no expectations except that you try. If you want to come, I will take you today. If not, these folks here will figure out something else." His voice was gentle despite its depth, and Adelaide found herself wanting to trust him. Perhaps it was simply that she had no other option, or perhaps it was something in his eyes, a steadiness that made her feel less afraid. "I cannot ride in daylight," she whispered. "The light hurts too much." Marcus nodded slowly. "Then we will wait until evening to leave. I have some furs to trade anyway, supplies to buy. We can head out when the sun is low, and I will make sure you are protected." Adelaide looked at the marshal, at Martha, at the doctor who had returned that morning to check on her. They all watched her expectantly, waiting for her decision. She took a shaky breath. "I will go with you." Something that might have been approval flickered in Marcus's eyes. He stood, his full height once again impressive. "I will be back at sunset. Be ready." He left with the marshal, and Adelaide heard them speaking in low tones on the porch. Martha helped her pack the few items that had been gathered for her: simple dresses and undergarments, a hairbrush, a coat that would fit better than the marshal's. The doctor gave her a tin of salve for her eyes and strict instructions to increase her exposure to light gradually, only minutes at a time at first. When the sun began its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in colors Adelaide had only read about, Marcus returned with a sturdy horse and a pack mule. He had fashioned a sort of hood from canvas and leather, something she could wear that would shield her face completely while still allowing her to breathe and see through a narrow mesh panel. "Put this on," he said, handing it to her. "It will help until we get into the trees where the light is not so harsh." The hood was warm and close, but it worked. When Adelaide stepped outside into the fading daylight, she felt heat on her skin for the first time in her life, a sensation so foreign and overwhelming that she froze in place. It was not painful as her father had claimed. It was warm, almost pleasant, though the brightness even through the mesh made her eyes water. "That is the sun," Marcus said quietly, standing beside her. "And above you, that is the sky." Adelaide tilted her head back, looking up through the protective hood at the vast expanse of deepening blue, streaked with orange and pink. It went on forever. No ceiling, no walls, nothing but endless space. Her knees weakened, and she would have fallen if Marcus had not caught her arm. "Easy. I know it is a lot. Here, let me help you onto the horse." He lifted her as if she weighed nothing, settling her into the saddle with a gentleness that contradicted his size and strength. He tied her bags to the pack mule, swung up onto his own horse, and took the reins of Adelaide's mount. Hold onto the saddle horn. I will guide your horse. We have several hours of riding ahead, but I will stop if you need rest." They left Kingston as the last light faded from the sky. Adelaide clung to the saddle, her body tense with fear and anticipation. The movement of the horse beneath her was strange, the height from the ground dizzying. But as they entered the forest and the canopy of trees blocked out the residual light, she felt her terror ease slightly. Marcus led them up a winding trail that climbed steadily into the mountains. He did not push the horses hard, maintaining a pace that was steady but not exhausting. Every so often, he would glance back at Adelaide, checking on her without comment. The night grew darker and cooler, and Adelaide realized she could finally lift the hood without pain. The world revealed itself in shades of silver and shadow. Moonlight filtered through the pine trees, illuminating the trail ahead. Adelaide could smell the forest, pine and earth, and something wild she could not name. She could hear the wind moving through the branches, the calls of night birds, the creaking of leather and the steady rhythm of the horses' hooves. "Are you managing?" Marcus called back to her. "Yes," Adelaide said, and was surprised to find it was true. "It is beautiful." She saw his shoulders relax slightly at her words. They rode in silence for a while longer, climbing higher into the mountains. Adelaide found herself studying Marcus's broad back, the confident way he sat his horse, the ease with which he navigated the dark trail. He was so different from her father, from the only man she had ever known. There was strength in him, yes, but it felt protective rather than threatening. "How much further?" she asked eventually. "Another hour or so. The trail gets rougher from here. Tell me if you need to stop." But Adelaide did not want to stop. Despite her exhaustion, despite her fear, she wanted to keep moving forward, away from the town and its overwhelming noise and light, toward whatever came next. She gripped the saddle horn tighter and nodded, even though Marcus could not see her in the darkness. The cabin appeared suddenly, a darker shadow against the forest. It was larger than Adelaide had expected, well built from solid logs with a stone chimney rising from one end. There was a small barn nearby, and she could see the shapes of chickens roosting in a coop, hear the soft sounds of other animals stirring at their approach. Marcus dismounted and came to help Adelaide down. Her legs nearly gave out when her feet touched the ground, weak from the long ride and the day's overwhelming events. He steadied her with a hand on her elbow. "Come inside. I will tend to the horses and bring your things in shortly." The cabin's interior was dark until Marcus lit a lantern, revealing a single large room with a sleeping area at one end, a kitchen area at the other, and a central space with a table, chairs, and a stone fireplace. Everything was neat and orderly, the home of a man who lived deliberately and with purpose. Furs hung on the walls, drying or waiting to be traded. Shelves held supplies and equipment. There was a rocking chair near the fireplace, a washstand in the corner, a water barrel by the door. Adelaide stood in the middle of the room, uncertain what to do. Marcus returned with her small bundle of belongings and set them on the table. "Are you hungry?" She realized she had not eaten since that morning. "Yes." He moved to the kitchen area, stirring the coals in the stove to life, setting a pan on the heat. Within minutes, the smell of cooking bacon filled the cabin, along with the warm scent of cornbread being warmed. He worked with practiced efficiency, and soon he set 2 plates on the table. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a chair. Adelaide sat, and they ate together in silence. She was acutely aware of him across from her, of his size and presence, but he made no move that felt threatening. When they finished, he cleared the plates and then turned to address the sleeping arrangements. "You will take the bed," he said, pointing to the area at the far end of the cabin. "I have extra blankets and I will make a pallet by the fire. In a few days I will build a partition, give you some privacy, but for tonight this will have to do." "I do not want to take your bed," Adelaide protested weakly. "I have slept in worse places, believe me. Get some rest. Tomorrow we will start figuring out how to help you adjust to daylight." Adelaide was too exhausted to argue. She moved to the bed, a real bed with a rope frame and a mattress stuffed with something that smelled like dried grass and pine needles. There were quilts, heavy and warm, and a pillow that felt like the greatest luxury she had ever known. She lay down fully clothed, too tired and overwhelmed to do more than pull the blankets over herself. She heard Marcus moving around the cabin, banking the fire, spreading out his own bedroll. Then the lantern light dimmed, and darkness filled the space. But it was not the oppressive darkness of the cellar. This darkness felt different, softer somehow, and beyond the cabin walls she could hear the sounds of the forest at night, a whole world alive and active. "Thank you," Adelaide whispered into the darkness, unsure if Marcus could even hear her. "You are welcome," came his deep voice from near the fireplace. "Sleep well, Adelaide." It was the first time he had used her given name without the title, and something about that simple familiarity made her feel, for the first time in her life, like she might actually be safe. The next morning, Adelaide woke to find Marcus already up and moving quietly around the cabin. The interior was still dim, only weak light filtering through the single window that Marcus had covered with a heavy cloth. She sat up slowly, disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. "Morning," Marcus said when he noticed her stirring. "I made coffee and biscuits. There is water in the pitcher if you want to wash up." Adelaide used the washstand, splashing cool water on her face, trying to orient herself. Her eyes felt better than they had the previous day, less strained. When she joined Marcus at the table, he studied her carefully. "How are you feeling?" "Strange," Adelaide admitted, "but better than I expected." He nodded, pouring her coffee from a battered pot. "I have been thinking about how to approach this. The doctor said you need to build up your tolerance to light gradually. I figure we start with just a few minutes, maybe with you looking at the light coming through the door rather than going outside immediately. We do that several times a day, increasing the time little by little. No rush, no pressure. We let your body adjust at its own pace." It was a reasonable plan, more thoughtful than Adelaide had expected. "What about you? Do you not have work to do?" "My work can wait or be done at night when you are resting. I trap and hunt, cut firewood, tend the animals. None of it needs to happen on a schedule." He paused, his blue-gray eyes serious. "I agreed to help you, Adelaide. That means making you the priority for now." Something in Adelaide's chest tightened at his words. She was not accustomed to being anyone's priority, to being seen as someone worth helping. She looked down at her coffee, blinking back unexpected tears. They started that morning with Marcus opening the door partway while Adelaide stood several feet back. Even the indirect daylight made her squint and tear up, but she forced herself to keep her eyes open to let them adjust. They did this for 5 minutes, then Marcus closed the door and let her rest in the dimness. "That was good," he said. "We will do it again in a few hours." Between sessions, Marcus went about his work inside the cabin, and Adelaide watched him, learning about this place that was to be her home for however long she needed. He showed her where he kept supplies, how to work the stove, how to draw water from the nearby stream using a bucket. He was patient with her questions, never making her feel foolish for not knowing things that seemed obvious to him. "Tell me about yourself," Adelaide said during one of their rest periods. "The marshal said you came from Missouri." Marcus settled into the rocking chair, his large frame making the furniture creak. "Not much to tell. I had a wife and a daughter back in Independence. Fever took them both in the winter of '74. I could not stay there after that, so I sold everything and headed west. Ended up here in these mountains and found it suited me. Been here almost 3 years now. I am sorry about your family, Adelaide said softly. Thank you. It gets easier, but you never really stop missing them. He looked at her, his expression gentle. What about you? Beyond what happened to you, what did you do down in that cellar all those years? I read, mostly. My father had stored boxes of books down there. They were damaged by moisture and time, but I learned to read from them, learned about the world. I knew about mountains and forests, about towns and cities, about animals and weather and all manner of things. I just never experienced any of it. What kind of books? Everything. Novels, encyclopedias, books about farming and animal husbandry, poetry, even some medical texts. I read them over and over until I had them nearly memorized. Marcus leaned forward, his interest clearly genuine. So you are educated, just not in practical matters. I suppose so. I can tell you about ancient Rome or how to treat various ailments or recite poetry in 3 languages, but I could not tell you how to actually live in the world. We will work on that, Marcus said. You have the knowledge. Now you just need the experience to go with it. They continued the light exposure throughout the day, gradually increasing the duration. By evening, Adelaide could stand in the open doorway for nearly 15 minutes without excessive pain, though her eyes still watered and the brightness made her head ache. Marcus seemed pleased with her progress. You are doing well, he told her. Better than I expected for the first day. Tomorrow we will try having you sit just outside the door in the early morning light, which is softer. That evening, after a dinner of venison stew that Marcus had prepared, they sat by the fireplace and talked. Adelaide found herself telling him about the books she had read, sharing the stories and knowledge that had sustained her through those dark years. Marcus listened attentively, occasionally asking questions, and in turn he told her about his life in the mountains, about tracking animals and reading signs in the forest, about the changing seasons and the harsh winters. It is a hard life, he admitted, but honest. I like knowing that everything I have I worked for. I like the solitude, the peace. Or I did until I realized peace can also be lonely. Adelaide understood that. She had been alone her entire life, but surrounded now by Marcus's presence. She was beginning to understand the difference between solitude and companionship. Over the following days, Adelaide's progress continued steadily. Marcus proved to be a patient teacher, never pushing her beyond what she could handle, but always encouraging her to try a little more. By the end of the first week, she could sit on the cabin's small porch in the early morning for an hour, her eyes growing accustomed to the soft light that filtered through the trees. It was during one of these sessions that Marcus decided it was time for the next step. He came and stood beside where she sat on the porch steps, looking out at the forest that surrounded them. "How do you feel today?" he asked. "Good. My eyes barely hurt anymore as long as the light is not too bright. Then I think you are ready. Come with me." He offered his hand, and Adelaide took it, letting him pull her to her feet. His hand was rough with calluses but warm and strong. He led her away from the cabin into the trees, following a trail she had not noticed before. They walked for perhaps 10 minutes, climbing slightly, until they emerged from the forest into a small clearing at the edge of a cliff. "Look," Marcus said softly. Adelaide looked, and her breath caught in her throat. Before her stretched a vast vista of mountains and valleys, layer upon layer of ridges fading into the distance. The sky above was a brilliant blue, dotted with white clouds that drifted lazily. The sun, which she had only glimpsed and felt but never truly seen, hung golden and warm in that endless expanse. "That is the sky," Marcus said, standing close beside her. "No ceiling, no boundaries, just space going on forever. And that is the sun, the source of all light and warmth. Your father lied to you, Adelaide. It does not destroy. It gives life. Adelaide felt tears streaming down her face, but for the first time in her life, they were tears of joy rather than pain. The warmth of the sun on her skin was gentle, pleasant, nothing like the burning agony her father had described. The sky was so vast and beautiful it made her feel impossibly small and yet somehow connected to everything. "It is magnificent," she whispered. "Yes, it is," Marcus agreed. "I thought you should see it properly without fear. This is your world now, Adelaide. All of this, the sky and the sun and everything beneath it. You are free to experience it all." She turned to look at him, this mountain man who had shown her such unexpected kindness. He was looking at the vista rather than at her, and in the full light of day, she could see him clearly for the first time. The strength in his features, the weathered lines around his eyes, the way the sun caught in his dark hair. He was handsome in a rough, unrefined way, and more than that, he was good. She had not known men could be good, having only her father as a reference. "Thank you," she said, and the words felt inadequate for everything she wanted to express. "Thank you for bringing me here, for helping me, for showing me this." Marcus looked down at her then, and something in his expression made her heart skip. "You are welcome. You deserve to see it, to know it, to live in it without fear." They stood together in that clearing for a long time, Adelaide drinking in the sight of the world she had been denied, Marcus standing quietly beside her like a guardian. And in that moment, something shifted between them, some invisible barrier crossed. They were no longer just a mountain man and a rescued woman. They were two people who had both known loss and isolation, finding unexpected connection in the wilderness. The weeks that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Adelaide's eyes continued to adapt, and soon she could move about freely during the day, though she wore a wide-brimmed hat Marcus had acquired for her on his next trip to town. She helped with the cabin work, learning to cook on the wood stove, to tend the chickens and collect eggs, to preserve food for the winter months that Marcus said were coming. Marcus taught her practical skills with the same patience he had shown from the beginning. How to identify edible plants in the forest, how to read animal tracks, how to split kindling and start a fire properly. He taught her to ride properly too, taking her on longer excursions into the mountains, showing her hidden meadows and cold streams, beaver ponds and elk trails. They talked constantly, sharing their thoughts and stories. Adelaide learned about Marcus's childhood in Missouri, his work as a farmhand before he married, his joy at becoming a father and his devastation at losing everything. Marcus learned about Adelaide's long years in darkness, her determination to survive, her hunger for knowledge and experience. "You are stronger than you think," Marcus told her one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. He had built the partition in the cabin as promised, giving Adelaide a private sleeping area, but they still spent their evenings together, reluctant to end the day's companionship. "I do not feel strong," Adelaide admitted. "I feel like I am constantly struggling to catch up, to understand things everyone else knows instinctively." Strength is not about what you know. It is about how you face what you do not know. You could have given up, let fear win, but you did not. Every day you push yourself a little further. "That is courage, Adelaide." She looked at him, at this man who had become so important to her in such a short time. "You make it easier. I do not think I could have done this alone. You would have found a way, but I am glad I could help." He paused, his gaze steady on hers. "I am glad you are here." There was weight to those words, meaning beyond the surface. Adelaide felt it settle around her like a warm cloak. She was glad too, and not just because Marcus had helped her. She was beginning to realize that what she felt for him went beyond gratitude. The turning point came in late September, nearly 3 months after Adelaide had arrived at the cabin. The aspen trees had turned gold, painting the mountainsides in brilliant color. Marcus had taken Adelaide higher into the mountains than they had been before, to a remote valley he used for hunting. They made camp there, Marcus teaching her how to properly set up a shelter and build a fire ring. That night, as they sat by the fire under a canopy of stars, Adelaide found herself studying Marcus in the flickering light. She had grown so accustomed to his presence, to his solid reliability and gentle strength. She knew the sound of his footsteps, the cadence of his speech, the way his eyes crinkled when something amused him. She knew he took his coffee black and strong, that he hummed old songs while he worked, that he always checked the perimeter before settling down for the night. And she knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified her, that she had fallen in love with him. "Marcus," she said softly, drawing his attention from the fire, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "You ever think about what comes next? I cannot stay with you indefinitely. People will talk, and I should probably try to make my own way eventually." Marcus's expression grew serious. "I have been thinking about that. Winter is coming and it gets harsh up here. Too harsh for you to leave safely even if you wanted to. I figured you would stay through the winter, and then in the spring we could discuss what you want to do." "What if I do not want to leave?" The question hung between them, heavy with implication. Marcus set down the stick he had been using to prod the fire and turned to face her fully. "Adelaide, I need to be honest with you. These months with you here have been some of the best I have had since I lost my family. I like having you around, teaching you things, talking with you. But I cannot ask you to stay if it is only because you feel obligated or because you do not know where else to go." "That is not why I would want to stay," Adelaide said, gathering her courage. She had survived 18 years in darkness, had learned to face the sun. She could be brave enough for this. "I would want to stay because I care for you, Marcus. Because somewhere in these past months, I stopped seeing you as just the man who rescued me and started seeing you as the man I love." She watched emotions play across his face: surprise, hope, uncertainty. When he spoke, his voice was rough with feeling. "I have been trying not to have those feelings. You have been through so much, you are still learning about the world. I did not want to take advantage, did not want to confuse gratitude with something else." "I know the difference," Adelaide said firmly. "I might be inexperienced in many things, but I have read enough, thought enough to understand my own heart. I love you, Marcus, not because you saved me, but because of who you are, because you are kind and patient and strong. Because you see me as a person, not as a victim or a burden. Because when I think about my future, I cannot imagine it without you in it." Marcus moved closer, reaching out to cup her face gently in his large, calloused hands. "I love you too," he said, the words sounding like they had been pulled from someplace deep inside him. "I have been falling in love with you since the day I first saw you in that marshal's office, trying so hard to be brave. I fought it because I thought it was wrong, thought I was too old for you, too rough, too broken from losing my first family. But God help me, Adelaide, I love you." When he kissed her, it was gentle and careful, mindful of her inexperience. But Adelaide leaned into him, her hands coming up to grip his shirt. The kiss deepened, and she felt 18 years of isolation and loneliness fall away. This was what she had been missing, what she had not even known she was missing. Not just freedom, but connection. Not just survival, but love. When they finally pulled apart, Marcus rested his forehead against hers. "If you stay, if you choose this life with me, I will spend every day making sure you never regret it. I will give you everything I have, everything I am." "I already have everything I need," Adelaide whispered. "I have you, and I have this beautiful world you have shown me. What more could I want? They talked late into the night, making plans, discussing practicalities. Marcus wanted to marry her properly, wanted to ride into town and speak to the minister, do things right. Adelaide agreed, though she pointed out that she did not care about formalities as much as she cared about building a life with him. "We will need to expand the cabin," Marcus said thoughtfully. "Add another room at least, make it more of a proper home. I can help with that. You have taught me enough that I am not completely useless." Marcus smiled, pulling her close against his side. "You were never useless. But yes, we will build it together. Everything from here on out, we do together." They returned to the cabin the next day, and true to his word, Marcus rode down to Kingston within the week to speak with the minister and the marshal. Adelaide went with him this time, no longer afraid of the town or its people. She wore her wide-brimmed hat and walked beside Marcus with her head held high, amazed at how different the world looked now that she was not terrified of it. The townspeople stared, of course. The story of the girl who had lived in darkness had spread through the community. But Marcus stayed close, his presence protective, and Adelaide found she could handle their curiosity. The minister, who remembered her from those first frightening days, was delighted by her transformation and agreed to perform the marriage ceremony. "You are a miracle, Miss Kane," he said warmly. "To see you now, healthy and strong and clearly happy, it is a testimony to God's grace and this good man's character." They were married in the small church a week later, in October of 1877, with the Marshal and Martha and a handful of others as witnesses. Adelaide wore a simple dress that Martha had helped her choose, nothing fancy but new and clean in hers. Marcus wore his best clothes, which were still rough by town standards but showed he had made an effort. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife and Marcus kissed her, Adelaide felt a completeness she had never imagined possible. She was no longer alone, no longer trapped, no longer afraid. She was married to a man she loved deeply, and together they would build a life in these mountains that had become her home. The winter that followed was harsh, as Marcus had warned. Snow piled deep around the cabin, and for weeks at a time they were isolated completely. But inside, they were warm and content. Marcus had prepared well, with stores of food and wood to see them through. He taught Adelaide to snowshoe, to identify animal tracks in the snow, to appreciate the stark beauty of the winter landscape. The enforced closeness of winter allowed them to learn each other in new ways. Adelaide discovered that Marcus talked in his sleep sometimes, fragments of dreams she never asked about. Marcus learned that Adelaide loved to read aloud by the fireplace, her voice bringing stories to life in the quiet cabin. They talked about everything and nothing, shared work and meals and the simple domesticity of married life. They also learned each other's bodies, the physical intimacy of marriage. Marcus was patient and gentle, always mindful of Adelaide's inexperience, and she found joy in this new aspect of their relationship. The vulnerability and trust required deepened the bond between them until they truly felt like one unit rather than two separate people. "Are you happy?" Marcus asked her one evening as they lay together in their bed, listening to the wind howl outside. "More than I ever thought possible," Adelaide answered honestly. "Sometimes I wake up and cannot believe this is my life now, that I have you and this home and the freedom to just exist." "You deserve all of it," Marcus said, pulling her closer. "You deserve every good thing this world has to offer." Spring came eventually, as it always did. The snow melted, revealing the muddy ground beneath. Wildflowers began to bloom in the meadows and animals emerged from their winter dens. Marcus began the work of expanding the cabin as he had promised, and Adelaide helped, learning carpentry as she had learned everything else from him. By summer, they had added 2 new rooms, one that would serve as a proper bedroom and one that Marcus said could be for whatever they needed. Adelaide knew he was thinking of children, though he had not said so directly. The thought both excited and scared her. She had no experience with babies, no memory of a mother's care, but she trusted that they would figure it out together as they had everything else. In July, Adelaide realized she was pregnant. She told Marcus one evening as they sat on the expanded porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. "Are you certain?" he asked, his voice tight with emotion. "As certain as I can be. Martha told me what signs to watch for when we were in town last month. I think I am about 2 months along." Marcus pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "A baby. We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Adelaide asked, suddenly uncertain. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Marcus said, his voice rough. "Scared, yes. It has been a long time since Emma was born, and I was not exactly skilled then. But happy, Adelaide, so deeply happy." They prepared through the fall, Marcus building a cradle from smooth pine, Adelaide sewing tiny clothes and blankets with fabric they had purchased in town. Martha came to visit twice, bringing supplies and advice, checking on Adelaide's health. The doctor made the trip up once as well, pronouncing Adelaide healthy and the baby developing well. Winter closed in again, and Adelaide grew large with their child. Marcus was attentive to the point of being overprotective, constantly worried about her comfort and safety. Adelaide bore it with good humor, knowing it came from love and from the fear of losing another family. Their son was born in late February of 1879, during a brief warm spell between snowstorms. Martha had come to stay for the birth, and she guided Adelaide through the long hours of labor with calm expertise. When the baby finally arrived, squalling and healthy, Marcus wept openly as he held him for the first time. "He is perfect," he said, looking from the baby to Adelaide with wonder. "You are both perfect." They named him Daniel, after Marcus's father. He was a good baby, healthy and strong, and Adelaide found that motherhood came more naturally than she had feared. Marcus was an involved father, comfortable with the tasks of infant care in a way that surprised and touched her. "I did this before, remember," he said when she commented on it. "Emma had me wrapped around her little finger from the day she was born. I am just grateful to have another chance." Life settled into a new rhythm, busier now with Daniel to care for but no less happy. Adelaide had been free for 2 years now, and sometimes she could barely remember the darkness of her past. It felt like a nightmare that had happened to someone else. Her real life was this: the cabin in the mountains, the husband she loved, the son she was raising, the endless sky above her and the sun on her face. They made trips to Kingston a few times a year, always staying a night or two with Martha, who had become a good friend. People in town had gotten used to seeing them, and the story of Adelaide's past had faded from immediate gossip to old news. She was just Marcus Ashford's wife now, the quiet woman with the serious eyes who had made a life in the mountains. On one such trip, when Daniel was about 6 months old, they encountered the marshal on the street. He tipped his hat to them with a smile. "Good to see you both, and this must be your boy, fine-looking child." "Thank you, Marshal," Marcus said, his hand on Adelaide's back, Daniel sleeping against her shoulder. "You know," the Marshal said thoughtfully, "I have been thinking lately about that day I found you, Miss Adelaide. If your father's step had not broken, if you had not been brave enough to leave that cellar, if Marcus here had not been willing to take you in, a lot of things had to go right for you to end up here, happy and healthy." "I think about that sometimes too," Adelaide admitted. "All the chances that had to align." "Maybe it was not chance," the Marshal said. "Maybe it was meant to be. Either way, I am glad it worked out the way it did. You deserve this happiness." As they walked away, Adelaide reflected on his words. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps there was some design to it all, some reason she had survived those dark years only to emerge into Marcus's care. Or perhaps it was simply luck and human kindness. Either way, she was grateful beyond measure. The years passed, marked by the changing seasons and the milestones of Daniel's growth. He learned to walk in the cabin during his second winter, Marcus and Adelaide hovering nervously as he toddled between them. He learned to talk, his first word being "da" to Marcus's delight. He grew into a sturdy toddler, fearless and curious about the world around him. When Daniel was 3, Adelaide realized she was pregnant again. This time, a daughter arrived in the spring of 1882, born as the aspen leaves were just beginning to unfurl. They named her Grace, and she was as different from Daniel as could be, quiet where he was loud, cautious where he was bold. Marcus was 40 by then, his dark hair showing threads of gray, but he was as strong and capable as ever. Adelaide, at 23, had fully grown into herself. The pale, frightened girl who had emerged from darkness was gone, replaced by a woman who was confident and competent, who could manage a household, raise children, help with the endless work of mountain life. "You ever miss it?" Marcus asked her one night after they had put the children to bed. "Town life, or the ease that comes with civilization?" Adelaide looked around the cabin that had become her home at the life they had built together. "Never," she said honestly. "This is where I belong, Marcus, with you, with our children in these mountains. I spent 18 years trapped in darkness, but you showed me the light. You showed me the sky and the sun and what it means to truly live. Why would I ever want to be anywhere else?" Marcus pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "I love you. I hope you know that every day I love you more than the day before." "I know," Adelaide said softly. "I feel the same." They had 2 more children over the next years, another son named James born in 1884 and a second daughter named Sarah born in 1887. The cabin expanded again to accommodate their growing family, and their life was full of the noise and chaos and joy that children bring. Marcus taught the boys to hunt and trap, to track and survive in the wilderness. Adelaide taught all the children to read using the books she had accumulated, determined they would have the education she had given herself in darkness, but with the added benefit of experience and understanding. Together, they taught their children about hard work, about kindness, about facing challenges with courage. The children knew their mother's story, told in age-appropriate ways as they grew old enough to understand. They knew she had been trapped once, that their father had helped her, that love and determination had built the life they all enjoyed. The story became part of their family lore, a reminder of what humans could overcome, of how much could change in a single life. When Adelaide turned 30 in 1889, Marcus threw her a small celebration, inviting Martha and a few other friends up from town despite the difficulty of the journey. It was a warm summer day, and they gathered outside the cabin, children running and playing, adults talking and laughing. Adelaide stood apart for a moment, watching the scene, feeling the sun warm on her face and the breeze lifting her hair. Marcus came to stand beside her, slipping his hand into hers. "What are you thinking about?" "Everything. How far I have come. How different my life is from what it could have been. Any regrets?" Adelaide turned to look at him, at this man who had changed everything for her. His hair was more gray than brown now, his face more lined, but his eyes still held that steady strength that had drawn her from the first. She loved him more now than she had at 19, their bond deepened by years and children and shared experiences. "Not a single one," she said. "You showed me the sun, Marcus. You showed me the sky and the world and what it means to be loved. You gave me everything. You gave me just as much, Marcus said. You gave me a reason to live again, to hope again. You gave me this family, this life. We gave each other everything. They kissed there in the sunlight, surrounded by the sound of their children playing and their friends celebrating. It was a perfect moment, a distillation of everything good they had built together. The years continued to pass. Marcus's hair went fully gray, and his body began to show the accumulated wear of a hard life, but he remained strong and active. Adelaide settled into her 40s with grace, a few lines around her eyes the only sign of aging. Their children grew and thrived. Daniel, their firstborn, became a skilled tracker like his father. Grace married a rancher from the valley when she was 20 and started her own family. James and Sarah were still at home, teenagers now, helping with the work and making their own plans for the future. In the summer of 1897, Adelaide celebrated her 38th birthday. She and Marcus sat together on the porch as they had countless times before, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Daniel had brought his new bride to visit. Grace had come with her 2 children, and the cabin was full of family and noise and life. "We did well," Marcus said quietly, his arm around Adelaide's shoulders. "We did," Adelaide agreed. "Better than I ever dreamed possible. Do you remember that first day I brought you up here, how scared you were? I remember. I also remember the day you took me to that clearing and showed me the sky properly for the first time. I had never felt the sun on my face until then, not really. I had never understood what I had been missing. And now I cannot imagine life without it, without any of this." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the light fade. Their children and grandchildren were inside, the sounds of family drifting out through the open windows. The mountains rose around them, eternal and protective. The sky above was vast and endless, scattered with the first stars of evening. Marcus had shown Adelaide the sun when she needed it most, had taught her to embrace the world she had been denied. In return, she had given him hope and love and a second chance at family. Together, they had built something beautiful and lasting in these wild mountains. As darkness fell and the stars emerged in full glory, they went inside to rejoin their family. Adelaide paused in the doorway, looking back one last time at the night sky. She thought briefly of the girl she had been, trapped in darkness and fear, and felt a surge of gratitude for every choice and chance that had led her here. She had never felt the sun on her face until Marcus Ashford took her outside and showed her the sky above. But he had given her so much more than sunlight. He had given her freedom, love, family, and a life beyond her wildest imaginings. And she had given him the same in return, their lives intertwining until they were inseparable. 2 souls who had found each other at exactly the right moment and built something extraordinary together. Their story was not one of dramatic rescues or grand gestures, but of patience and daily choices to love and support each other. It was a story of healing and growth, of 2 broken people making each other whole. And it was a story that would continue through their children and grandchildren. A legacy of love that began when a mountain man showed a frightened girl that the world was not something to fear, but something to embrace with open arms. Inside the warm cabin, surrounded by family, Adelaide caught Marcus's eye across the room and smiled. He smiled back, and in that simple exchange was everything they had ever needed to say. They had found each other in darkness and built a life in the light. They had loved deeply and well. And that, in the end, was all that mattered. The years ahead would bring more changes. James would eventually leave to seek his fortune in the railroad business, surprising everyone with his head for numbers and negotiation. Sarah would become a teacher, opening a small school in Kingston and dedicating herself to educating the children of the territory. Daniel would take over more of the trapping and hunting, working alongside his aging father until Marcus finally admitted he needed to slow down. But through it all, Marcus and Adelaide remained the center of their family, the foundation upon which everything else was built. They grew old together in the cabin in the mountains, their love deepening with each passing year. They watched Montana transition from territory to state in 1889, saw the Wild West gradually become less wild, witnessed progress and change all around them while their love remained constant. When Marcus died peacefully in his sleep in 1905 at the age of 63, Adelaide felt like part of her soul had been torn away. They had been married for 28 years, and she had never spent a night without him since that first evening in the cabin. She grieved deeply, but she did not break. He had made her too strong for that. She lived another 15 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, the matriarch of a large and loving family. She told them stories about their grandfather, about the mountains they loved, about her own strange journey from darkness to light. She taught them to be kind and courageous, to face challenges head-on, to never take the simple gift of sunshine for granted. When Adelaide died in 1920 at the age of 61, she was laid to rest beside Marcus on a hillside overlooking the valley, in the place where he had first shown her the endless sky. Her children placed a simple marker that read, Adelaide Kane Ashford, 1859–1920. She learned to see the light. Their story passed into family legend, told and retold through generations. The cabin stood for many more years before finally succumbing to time and weather, but the land remained in the family. Daniel's descendants eventually built a new house there, determined to maintain the connection to the place where it all began. And sometimes, on clear summer evenings, family members gathering there would stand outside and look up at the vast Montana sky, thinking of the woman who had never seen it, until a mountain man took her outside and changed her life forever. They would remember that love and courage could overcome even the darkest circumstances, that two broken people could make each other whole, and that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with a single step into the light. The story of Adelaide and Marcus Ashford became more than just a tale of rescue and romance. It became a reminder that it is never too late to change, that love can be found in unexpected places, and that the human spirit has an incredible capacity for healing and growth. In the Wild West of the late 1800s, where life was hard and survival was never guaranteed, they had found something precious and held on to it with both hands. Their love story had no dramatic battles or death-defying escapes. It was quieter than that, more intimate. It was about daily choices to be kind, patient, and understanding. It was about showing someone the beauty of the world and having them show you the beauty in yourself. It was about building a life one day at a time, one shared sunrise at a time, until those days accumulated into years and decades of contentment. That was the true legacy of Marcus and Adelaide Ashford. Not grand gestures, but quiet persistence. Not dramatic declarations, but steady devotion. They had taken the broken pieces of their lives and fitted them together into something beautiful and whole. And in doing so, they had created a love that lasted beyond their lifetimes, echoing through the generations that came after them. A testament to what is possible when two souls find each other at exactly the right moment and choose, every single day, to walk forward together into the light.